When we think of the evilest rulers in history, names like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Benito Mussolini rush to mind. But it's important to remember that brutality existed in rulers well before the 1930s. Others, like Attila the Hun or Chinese Empress Wu, may seem like obvious choices. But after looking deeper at the effects of their rule and how they were perceived by those they reigned over, it becomes clear that they're not the worst rulers in history. Instead, they suffered from then-contemporary historians' ire, Attila because he wasn't Roman, and Wu because she was a woman. So, it's time to focus instead on those despots who were truly the cruelest rulers in history, many of whom are less known, though there will definitely be a few names on this list that ring a bell, including a number of them whose cinematic depictions have only further entrenched their place in the cultural consciousness. Before we start, be sure to subscribe and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos. This is the channel Learning the World. Let's go! Genghis Khan wiped out 11% of the world's population. Yes, it's widely known that Genghis Khan was a horrific ruler, sacked entire cities, and was ruthless in his executions, all on his way to amass the largest empire the world had ever seen. But the sheer brutality of his rule is often softened by such generalizations. Khan was creative in how he would execute his enemies, especially when it came to nobles. Because he believed he couldn't spill their blood, he would snap their necks or choke them out. But that was rare. More popular was piling them under a large board on top of which he and his warriors would party until each noble had been crushed. In one instance, a chap with whom he sought to conduct trade affronted the Khan by slaying his entire diplomatic party. In response, Khan sacked his entire city, taking hundreds of thousands of lives, and captured the impolite host. To teach this leader a lesson, Khan poured molten silver into his ears and eyes. Over the course of his empire-building career, Khan showed no mercy to his enemies, often completely wiping out entire cities or using hostages as human shields in combat. This led to his wiping out an estimated 40 million people or 11% of the world's population. Tamerlane the Great built towers out of enemy skulls. Tamerlane the Great, who also went by the name Timur, was a Turkic conqueror whose reign lasted roughly 40 years until his passing in 1405 CE. He believed he was a descendant of Genghis Khan and sought to emulate his forebear with an empire of his own, which ended up stretching from Russia to India and the Mediterranean region. Like Genghis Khan, Tamerlane was unflinching in his axiom of no mercy. He annihilated whole sites, taking tens of thousands of lives. It's rumored that he slew 70,000 in Isfahan, 20,000 at Aleppo, and 70,000 in Tikrit. He would sneak spies into opposing camps to tell of his exploits, such as burning down a mosque full of people in Damascus to sow seeds of fear. In Baghdad, it's believed he beheaded 90,000 people and built more than 100 towers out of the decaying skulls. Last, it's important to point out some historians believe Tamerlane was well versed in the ways of evil, often skinning alive those who refused to accept Islam. Vlad the Impaler was made famous for impaling his enemies. Young Vlad was made a hostage to Ottoman Sultan Murad II in 1442 CE to ensure his father's acquiescence to the throne. On his way back to his father, Vlad learned of his assassination at the hands of boyars, nobles of the warrior class, leaving Vlad no other choice but to adopt the official title of Vlad III Dracula, son of Dracul, and embark on a series of campaigns against the Ottoman overlords. Though remembered as a hero in Wallachian, present-day Romanian, folklore, his tactics against his enemies comprised night raids, mass slayings, disembowelment, and skinning and boiling people alive. However, his preferred method of torment was impalement, earning him the moniker Vlad the Impaler. His life was punctuated by a series of campaigns, some of which were more successful than others, though each was equally vicious. Between just two of these campaigns, he is believed to have impaled more than 43,000 people. Vlad perished as he lived, in combat. Though gone, he was not forgotten. Folklore has kept rumors of his sadistic practices alive, such as dining on impaled bodies and using their blood as a dip for his bread. In fact, many historians believe that he served as the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. Qin Shi Huang burned books, entombed scholars, and impoverished a nation. Qin Shi Huang is credited with having created the first unified Chinese empire, Qin dynasty, 221 to 207 BCE, but he was able to do so only through erratic ruling, the dismantling of any semblance of an education system, and working nearly his entire population to their end. Huang seized power in 221 BCE and strictly followed 7 principles, some of which advocated severe punishment, speaking in opposites and acting in contraries, and issuing unfathomable orders. He was unquestionably paranoid about the abilities of the educated and, therefore, burned books of inestimable value. He slew 460 Confucian scholars in just 1 year, allegedly because they were unable to make him immortal. In trying to establish an elaborate transportation system and build a wall to keep out enemies, a precursor to the Great Wall of China, Huang relocated approximately 120,000 families. He established a peasant class, declaring all to be equal under one law, then taxed them heavily. This effectively abolished the preceding ruling elite. Because of the heavy taxes and strict overseeing of hard labor for the transportation and wall system, thousands were overworked, starved, or perished of disease. And despite his efforts, his constant striving toward ultimate unification fell apart less than a decade after his passing in 210 BCE. He thought so highly of himself that he had laborers enshrine him in a massive tomb with 8,000 life-size terracotta warriors and horses to ride forth with the departed king, which was so well hidden, it wasn't found until 1974. Ivan the Terrible slew his heir and watched 100 people perish from torture. Ivan the Terrible of Russia was bred amid a hotbed of political collusion and conspiracy. Before naming himself the first Tsar of Russia in 1547, he witnessed conspiring boyars, nobles of the warrior class, rip power away from his mother, allegedly slain by poison. He was equally vicious in foreign excursions. After invading Novgorod, he had the archbishop clad in a bear skin and then hunted by ravenous hounds. He also had people tied to sleighs before being run into freezing waters. In his later years, Ivan became so erratic that he accidentally gave his heir brain damage after striking him in the heat of an argument, leaving him mentally inept but still in line for the throne. Another instance saw Ivan beat his pregnant daughter-in-law, leading to her later miscarriage. Ivan the Terrible passed of a heart attack while playing chess in 1584, leaving Russia to wait through the time of troubles that sparked after his heir's demise just a decade later. Leopold II demanded severed hands to prove bullets weren't wasted. In order to protect the inhabitants of what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo from Arab slavers and to more easily spread the word of the Christian God, Belgian King Leopold II carved out the world's first private colony, the Congo Free State, in the heart of Africa in the mid to late 19th century. What ensued was decades of forced labor and beatings suffered by the local population. Initially, Leopold facilitated the dehumanizing ivory trade in his private colony, the horrors of which were spelled out by Joseph Conrad in his novella Heart of Darkness after he visited the Congo. Once the demand for rubber increased, due to the invention of cars and bicycles, Leopold learned that his personal swath of land was abundant in wild rubber trees. The locals were thus impressed via kidnappings by colonizers to work in the jungle. The colonizers took part in vicious rapes of native women, and to prove that they weren't wasting ammunition on animals or shooting strays, they would cut the hands off living enslaved people. Pol Pot decimated about 1/5 of Cambodia's population in 4 years. Incited by the imperialistic US forces in Vietnam during the 1960s and 70s, Pol Pot and his fellow French-educated Cambodian natives sought to root out any remnants of capitalism in Cambodia in order to instill a purely agrarian communist society. It's thought that the movement may not have sounded so attractive to the Cambodian population had the US not indiscriminately bombed the country during its campaign against Vietnam. Nevertheless, the Khmer Rouge Party took power in 1975 and quickly implemented its plan. Over 2 million Cambodians were forced out of the cities to work the fields. The goal was to create a peasant class, and Pol Pot saw urbanites and the intelligentsia as useless to the new order. Many of this new class were told, to keep you is no benefit, to destroy you is no loss. Between executions of the capitalist intelligentsia and the rampant starvation, disease, and overwork of the newly formed peasant class, about 1.5 million people died between 1975 and 1979, all under Pol Pot's leadership. In one detention center that held nearly 20,000, only 7 people are known to have survived. The Vietnamese army seized power from Khmer Rouge in 1979, but Pol Pot eluded capture for the rest of his life, leading a series of guerrilla strikes across the region until he passed in 1998. Maximilien Robespierre was the king of the guillotine. Few historical figures are as controversial as Maximilien Robespierre. On one hand, he advocated for universal suffrage, for unrestricted admission to national posts, and against racial and religious discrimination. On the other hand, he was the foremost ruler during the French Reign of Terror during the Revolution, imprisoning roughly 300,000 and slaying as many as 40,000. He was an ardent Jacobin at the start of the French Revolution and was eventually elected head of the Committee of Public Safety in 1793. From that point on, his severe nationalism struck down or silenced any voice in opposition to the new republic that was emerging. His burgeoning egoism led to his liberal use of the guillotine, even on one-time allies such as Georges Danton after he suggested scaling down the Reign of Terror. Eventually, Robespierre's autocracy and vicious punishments made him highly unfavorable, especially after he, in contradiction to his earlier beliefs, tried to instill a national religion called the cult of the Supreme Being. He was thus overthrown in 1794 amid one of the many power changes throughout the revolution, and Robespierre himself was executed via guillotine that year. Talat Pasha conducted the Armenian genocide. In the second decade of the 20th century, the Ottoman government saw the rise of a new political body known as the Young Turks. Headed by Talat Pasha, the Young Turks sought to establish a new secular order and slowly siphon power from the Sultan, though he remained, if only in title, the head of state. World War I broke out, and because the Young Turks sided with Germany and Austria, Armenians under Ottoman control saw a chance at independence should the Russians win. They therefore moved into eastern Anatolia, and many joined Russian forces. Pasha couldn't let such open insubordination continue, so he forced the relocation of more than 1 million Armenians from Anatolia, Constantinople, and other provinces to strongholds in Syria and Mesopotamia. What followed was widespread inhumane treatment. Estimates of Armenian deaths range as high as 1.5 million during the deportation. Slowwalkers were shot, and, in at least one case, a pregnant woman was forced to give birth on horseback so as not to slow the process. Just before the Ottomans surrendered to Allied forces, Pasha resigned and fled with other Young Turks. He was slain by an Armenian in 1921. That's all for today. If you liked the video, put a like and don't forget to subscribe. Bye everyone.